Okay, so thank you so much for joining us, everyone. My name is Megan Enticknap, and I am the Deputy Head of the Middle and Senior School at Elmwood. So thank you for being here and coming to learn more about our at-home learning program. We're going to go through a slideshow, and as we're going through, if you do have any questions, you can put them into the chat. I don't see the Q&A function there, so I think we'll just use the chat function if you do have questions. And then our moderator, Mr. Perot, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, will be able to, at the end, help us work through some of those questions if they haven't already been answered by the content that we're going to present. So Mr. Perot is our Director of Technology at Elmwood School, and he's going to be running the slideshow and also helping to answer a few questions if it's related to any of the questions about technology and devices and how we're going to ensure that our technology supports the at-home learners. We also have Mr. Belly on the call, and I'm going to be introducing him a little bit later in the slides and his role with our at-home learning program. So Mr. Belly is a teacher at Elmwood who also has extensive experience in online learning and running online courses. So welcome to Elmwood. Whether you are a new student or a returning student who has selected at-home learning, we're very excited to have you back. We are ramping up our preparations for next week, and everyone is just so thrilled to be in a position to be able to welcome our learners back to school next week. And I want to assure you that when we talk about our learners and our students, we are talking about our students who are in school as well as our students who are at home. So we know for the at-home learners, and we learned this when we were in the school closure period last spring, that for these girls, the connections, the engagement, and feeling part of the school community is as important, if not more important, than for the girls who are physically in school. So we do want you to know that when we say welcome to Elmwood, we are welcoming every single one of our girls and our families. Next slide, please. So the 2020-21 school year is definitely going to look different than what we've had in the past. We are very excited to be welcoming some of our students back physically to the building, and also really excited to be able to apply a lot of the things we learned from the school closure period to support our at-home learners. So we had a period of a few months, as many of you know, at the end of last academic year, where we had to pivot very suddenly to supporting every single girl remotely with our curriculum and our co-curricular program. And so we were able to really test and trial, and we took a lot of feedback from both students and parents and teachers about what was working and what wasn't. And so for this upcoming school year, we have really taken all of those things into consideration and thought quite deeply about how best to support our at-home learners. Next slide, please. So throughout all of this, as I mentioned earlier, when we talk about Elmwood School and our values, these are things, while the school year is going to look different, these are things that have not changed. And these are things that apply equally for our at-home learners and our learners that are at school. So the Elmwood values are what really dictate our choices, our decisions, the way we work with the families. And these things are what make Elmwood such a special place. So respect for each other, demonstrating integrity in all of our actions and behaviors, innovation. So obviously this year we have really kind of, that one has risen to the top in terms of having to think about how to continue to support all of our girls and families with these changing times. Collaboration is key. And I will say for our at-home learners, collaboration, when I talk about collaboration, thinking about collaborating with your peers, with your teachers, but also the families collaborating with the school. So that ongoing communication about what's working, what isn't working is going to be key. And then responsibility. What is our own responsibility? What is our responsibility together? And how can we use that responsibility to improve the learning for everyone? So going on to the next slide, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of the at-home learning program. So all at-home learners will be part of a homeroom pod and will have a regular timetable. So when you're thinking about, well, who will my daughter be coming into contact with as an at-home learner, it will be her grade level cohort that she will be in. And those grade level cohorts, the at-home learners, are considered as part of our numbers. So we have ensured that if your daughter at any point or you as a family decide to physically return to school, there is a physical space for her in the school. And I think that's really important to mention because not all schools are able to do this, but we have committed to ensuring that if a family wanted to switch to being in school, we would need a week's notice to ensure that we had everything ready and that the student was prepared for that return as well. But there is physical space for all of our girls in the school, should that choice be made. So the students that are at home will be following a regular timetable as the at-school learners and will be in classes with those learners. So we are not creating a separate school of at-home learners that are doing things separately and differently from the girls in school. And the reason we've done that, well, there are, you could say there are some cons to that that method, but again, it's about the engagement and the girls feeling part of the community. So we thought it was really important for them to continue to have those interactions with their classmates, with their teachers, and to feel part of the group. And so while the downside of that might be that, their day feels long, they're at home, they're following a regular timetable, how do we manage the screen time? Those are all things that we're willing to be flexible with and help provide support with. But again, we really didn't want the at-home learners to feel separate from the students at school. We will continue to use Schoology. So for any new families, Schoology is our learning management system, and it is a very comprehensive system where the girls will have virtual spaces for all of their classrooms. And in those spaces, there are different things that can occur. So this is where teachers will share updates, will post resources, will post the information about any learning engagements or any tasks that are coming up, deadlines for those tasks, etc. There are also opportunities for discussion threads, both between teacher and student to student. So Schoology is going to continue to be a key area where all of the information about each class will be shared. If we can go to the next slide, please. So attendance will be taken, and this is important in terms of our own records for demonstrating completion of courses and course credits and hours for attendance. So if the teacher is running a synchronous class, the teacher will take attendance with the at-home learners and the in-school learners all together at the same time, just as if those at-home learners were sitting in the classroom. If the class is asynchronous, or if there is a learner attending from a different time zone, so they are not able to attend the synchronous class, then we're going to be setting up a Google form sheet for attendance. And this will be explained by Mr. Belly and the homeroom teacher next week. Once the classes start, the girls will be explained how to document their attendance if they are not physically joining a synchronous class where the teacher is taking the actual attendance. It's actually very simple. It just gives us a timestamp for I'm joining this class, I am now beginning my work on this class, and then we can take that and transfer that information to our attendance system so that on the report cards, the attendance is accurate. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So in terms of this idea of synchronous and asynchronous classes, we, and again, remembering that we do want to be mindful of the screen time in terms of being at the desk and, physically connected to that, that computer, that laptop. So the core classes will most often have synchronous live class components. Now, when I say that, it might be that it is, the teacher introducing a lesson and then the students doing some work, but that student will still be connected virtually through the feed on Google Meet. and then the teacher will be delivering some more content or providing points of clarification. If there's group work going on, they will be doing it through a Google Doc or a separate Google Meet in a small group. So the synchronous class, I don't want you to think it's the student sitting there, well, kind of like we're doing right now with me just talking at you for the whole 80 minutes. So the synchronous class will be like we typically structure our classes, where there will be some direct instruction, there will be some independent work, there will be some time for clarifying and asking questions, and all of that will happen with the at-home learners connected through the Google Meet. Our teachers will also have iPads or phones or second devices where they will be able to share the class notes and slides. For example, if they're using a whiteboard, if they're using a slideshow, that the at-home learners will be able to see that as well. We will also be recording these synchronous classes so that for learners who were not able to physically join that day for some reason, whether they're in a different time zone and can't join, or whether they had an appointment. So those recorded lessons will also be able to be shared then, the videos of those lessons with the students. Other classes will be a mix of synchronous, asynchronous, and independent online work, and that's really going to depend on the course, and the teacher will explain all of this to the students. So for example, with a phys ed class, if they are going outside or going for a walk in the neighborhood, they will not necessarily, and I'm going to explain why I'm saying not necessarily, be able to stay connected in a synchronous class through that whole endeavor. Obviously, if they're outside and there's no Wi-Fi, or if it's an active activity, there's no one carrying a phone or a laptop around to help the at-home learner connect. In these cases, the teacher would connect with the student at the start of the class to explain what the class is doing that day, to give them some context and to kind of provide the framing for that class. And then the student would participate in the activity. And obviously, if it was a group activity, there would be some modifications given. And then the student would then report back in with the teacher at the end of the class to do reflection, to talk about, share what they had done, how they had carried out that activity in their own time. So this is going to be very dependent from class to class in terms of the synchronous, asynchronous component. Some of our senior school classes will also be structured whereby the students will, and this is a recommendation from many organizations that run online learning, where they will be working on a project. And so the teacher might introduce the project or introduce the task, and then the students will have a couple of classes where they're working on that task, but the teacher has office hours where the student can check in with them, to have a meeting to discuss how their work is going, to ask questions, etc. So we will be running these different types of classes based on the class, based on the subject, and based on the age of the student. So there will still be opportunity for collaborative group work for our at-home learners, and that opportunity to regularly connect with teachers and ask questions. Next slide, please. The at-home learners can join clubs and co-curriculars, as many of these will be virtual anyway, even for our in-school students. So if you've been on any of the other webinars, you will know that we have pretty strict regulations around cohorting and mixing of students, which makes it difficult to run our typical clubs program, where kids from across different grades would be interacting and connecting and moving to different areas of the school. And those are lots of things that we are not permitted to currently do. And so we will be offering a lot of these opportunities during the lunch period. So if a student wants to join a club, even if they're at school, they may be sitting in their homeroom hub virtually joining the Classics Club, for example, and then interacting with Miss Ellison and with the other students in the club virtually, regardless of whether they're at school or at home. Some of the obviously outdoor recess type activities are going to be controlled in terms of the students will be at school, students will be restricted to the areas they can go to. and they will be cohorted by grade. So during the time of the lunch period, the students, your own daughter, you will probably want to encourage her to get outside, go for a walk, move locations, go have lunch, and those things. But unless there was a club happening during the actual lunchtime, we would expect your daughter to have a routine at home versus being connected to physically to or virtually to something going on at the school. But as soon as the lunchtime or the recess period transitioned to a club or an enrichment time, then she would be reconnecting. So again, depending on your daughter, depending on what she wants to join, and as these opportunities are shared, her middle of the day might look slightly different. All of our assemblies will be virtual. So again, your daughter can join from home, just like our students at school will be joining virtually from their homeroom hub. Any guest speakers will all be virtual this year because we're not allowing external people to come into the building. Any special events. So for example, Camp Elmwood next week, not next week, the week after, we cannot physically go to camp this year, but we are running virtual activities to still allow that time for connections, relationship building, and also leadership opportunities for our older students. And so all of these events, there will be aspects where your daughter can join in, and that will be explained by their homeroom teacher. So again, we are very consciously making sure with anything we're planning to say, okay, so it's almost like two streams. What will this look like for the students in school, and what will this look like for the students at home? Next slide, please. So this is where I would like to introduce Mr. Belly. So Mr. Belly has been a teacher at Elmwood. He started in our tutoring program and then has become a full-time classroom teacher over the past couple of years. I often call him the Renaissance man. I don't know if he knows that actually, but he has a wide range of experience and talents. And one of them is his experience with supporting online learners. So he has done training and also offered online courses through other organizations as well as through Elmwood. And he is very well versed in what are the best strategies for teachers to use, as well as what are the best strategies for helping to support online learners with their courses. So Mr. Belly will be doing, is our remote learning coordinator for the middle and senior school. He has specific responsibilities related to the girls who are staying at home, and some of them you can see on the screen there. So in terms of if students or parents have questions, in terms of doing weekly check-ins and monitoring both the academic and social emotional well-being, how the girls are doing, do they have any questions, do they need any support? In addition to Mr. Belly, and he's going to speak to the next slide in a minute, I'm going to stop talking. But in addition to that, the other key contacts for the at-home learners will obviously be their homeroom teachers. So Mr. Belly will also be in direct contact with homeroom teachers who are working with girls who are at home, subject level teachers, myself, Miss Fraser, who is our Director of Student Success. So if a student who's learning from home needs some modification or accommodations for some tasks or timelines of work, then that will all happen through Miss Fraser and Mr. Belly. And then as well, Mr. Perot. So Mr. Perot, if you had technological questions or concerns, would also be kind of jumping in to support and help. So I'm going to ask Mr. Belly to introduce himself, and we could go to the next slide that he's going to speak to.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mr. Belly, and as Ms. Entignac mentioned, I will be your remote learning coordinator for the year. So my job will be to make sure that all of you are well supported as you pursue your at-home learning during this strange school year. So I will be reaching out to each of you weekly, at least to start, to make sure that everything is going well. I'll be able to help all of you with some technological problems, should you have any. And also, if you're having trouble maybe reaching the teacher of your course, or if you're struggling with Schoology or anything like that, you can reach out to me and I will be glad to help. So I'll be reaching out to you guys proactively, and you can also message me if there's anything, if you have any problems. So for at-home learners, what do we need to do this year? So if you were here last year after March break, when we abruptly kind of moved to the online environment, it'll be very similar. So as an at-home learner, the first thing you need is, of course, a quiet workspace. You will be doing schoolwork, obviously. So you'll want earbuds, ear pods, or maybe a headset for better audio. Headset probably being the best. You'll need notepad, paper, pens, things like that to do any written work, which you might be asked to take a picture of to send in to your teacher or even to scan. You'll of course need access to email and Schoology. So most things will be through Schoology. You'll be submitting work through there. You'll be getting updates. You'll be accessing schoolwork. So access to Schoology, very important. You'll need a space to do physical activity. So physical education will still be offered to at-home learners. So you'll need some room to move around. And if you can do some work outside and you're not cooped up inside all day, that would be ideal. And last but certainly not least, and probably the most important, is as at-home learners, you will be following the same schedule as all the students already at school, or sorry, that are attending school physically. So you'll want to stick to a routine. So make sure to set an alarm in the morning, get up, do all your stuff, have breakfast, and then you'll be following your schedule as normal. So just because you're at home doesn't mean you're on vacation. You're still one of our Elmwood students, and you'll be following the same schedule as everyone else. So that's very important. And I think
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Belly. If we, there may be some questions that we will ask you to answer as we look through the Q&A or the chat. Mr. Perot, I was wondering if you could speak to the question about the network and
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was gonna jump in there. So a great question was asked about network infrastructure. So actually today we've just lit up a fiber link that's 5 times faster than our previous fiber link into the building. We're hoping that this is sufficient to cover all the increased network needs. As you guys probably know, a lot of you working remotely, network speed is super important to streaming. So yeah, we've increased that. We've also increased the number of access points we have in the school over the summer, and retired some older access points. So we are doing a whole lot. We have our fingers crossed because there's always a little magic to networks as well. But we've done a whole lot and spent a bunch of money to prepare for this. So there was also a question there about outdoor spaces. So certain outdoor spaces that are very close to the building have pretty decent network speed. I can't speak specifically to streaming from those spaces. I know that students often sit very close to the building when certain classes go outside at regular times, and they're able to access the internet fairly well. So I won't make any promises about streaming from those spaces. However, we are looking into seeing if we can get an antenna that would cover off the outdoor area that Megan alluded to in a previous presentation. But we have an outdoor area on a basketball court, so we're hoping that that could be used with internet from there. So if a class is scheduled out of there, we don't have that covered yet because we have to order that equipment. But yeah, so that's that answer.
Wonderful. And as I mentioned, if the teachers are aware that if they have at-home learners, they need to be very cognizant of what they're doing with their lessons. And if they're choosing to conduct a lesson outside, what does that mean for their at-home learner? And until we have some of these systems more tested and kind of trialed or set up, that the teacher will likely be making as many efforts to do things in the classroom as possible. The one class where that is different is PE, because we are conducting no PE classes inside. If the weather is terrible, then the girls will be doing more of a health aspect of their PE curriculum. And then obviously the at-home learners will easily be able to join that. But phys ed is the one class where we are not having any indoor physical activities to start. So all of the physical phys ed classes will be taking place outside, but the phys ed department has also worked very hard to ensure that the at-home learners will continue to be supported. And as Mr. Perot said, there are some areas where they may still even be able to have some virtual connection during the class, but it's going to really be dependent on what they're actually doing in that class. And so this is something where we're just going to have to keep in communication about how things are going, and Mr. Belly can help with that, as well as our phys ed department. How will tests and exams work? So one of the things that we're, in terms of assessment and evaluation, we will definitely not be looking to run a lot of tests and exams in terms of what you might traditionally think of. And to be perfectly honest, this is not different from what we would be doing anyway, because in terms of assessment and evaluation, as a school, we are very highly focused as well on other types of assessment other than tests and exams. But we do know that we want students to be prepared for testing and exam scenarios and situations. And we also have those as aspects and components for kind of summative assessment opportunities. So for at-home learners, the way we would handle this is that they would either be on a Google Meet with the teacher and the class when the test or exam was happening. If it was a learner who could not join the class synchronously, then we have systems where we would either have a parent sign a proctor agreement to say that they had supervised the invigilation of that test or exam, or we would also have, depending on the timing of it, we've also had scenarios where the student would video themselves writing the test or exam, and it's very kind of dependent on the student. And those are things that Mr. Belly would work with each student in terms of, okay, you've got a test coming up, this is what the teacher's suggesting, is that going to work for you? But also knowing that we will be looking to assess and evaluate in alternative ways, because the running of tests and exams obviously does add a layer of integrity and ensuring academic honesty that we would still need to uphold. Oh, that's a great question about the school uniform during at-home learning. I was going to put that on the slide. So what I will say is that I think when you're in your uniform, you're ready to learn and you feel part of the school community. So I do recommend that you try getting up each morning and getting dressed in the school uniform, ready for your day. I do realize that that might feel a bit odd or inauthentic because you're not coming to school. And I'm going to guess that you wouldn't choose to wear your uniform on any given day at home if you didn't have to. So there's going to be no one there to police it. What I will suggest is that this is a discussion between you and your parents. So what are your expectations for yourself, and what do your parents think in terms of what you need to be successful with your day? So I'm recommending that you try getting up, getting dressed, putting that uniform on, and getting into your learning space and ready to go for the day. But I also think that this is going to have to be something that is almost like a home agreement in terms of what you and your parents feel make the most sense for you with what you're going to wear to all of your classes and for your learning for the day. So if you want to discuss that with Mr. Belly or me as well, like, we'd be happy to chat with you about, like, okay, what makes sense and what are you going to do, and we can go from there. Mr. Pro or Mr. Belly, do you see any other questions questions that you want to address in the chat?
There is a curiosity about, how many students have chosen this. Yeah, I imagine that's something that may change based on situation, but did you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, so we have per grade in the middle senior school anywhere from 0% per grade. So some grades have no students who have selected at-home learning, up to about 24% per grade. So I would say on average across the whole school, middle to senior, it's about 15% of students that have selected at-home learning. In some cases, this is because of a geographical issue. So students that are not physically in Ottawa yet, but are hoping to be in Ottawa. So as Mr. Perot said, these numbers could change. Some of it is based on obviously family needs. Some of it is based on families who had concerns about the timing of the school day and said that, for us, it would be very difficult to not be able to drop our daughter off before 8. And so we're going to choose to remain at home for now, because that is easier for our family, because we can't work within the confines of the school day with our schedule. Obviously, for some people, there are concerns around autoimmune or immunocompromised, either family members or close members of the family. So there's lots of different reasons why people have chosen at-home learning. But some of those reasons are things that could be in flux and could change. And some of them I think will remain for the entire year. So we are committed, as I said, to supporting learners who are going to choose to remain at home all year, as well as learners who might have a situation change or make a different choice. As long as we have at least a week's notice, then we will work to support everyone.
There is a question about Picture Day, if that'll happen this year. And if it will be outside.
Yeah, so we're not doing pictures yet. We're not having any official school picture day. So that remains to be seen, because we're not even doing it physically yet at this point. So what we are going to do, and we've already talked about with the at-home learners, is we're going to have homeroom teachers do little photos of every student in their homeroom. And so the homeroom learners will be part of that. And we're going to kind of create like a homeroom photo collage for each homeroom, so that we have a record of the student photo that's going to be quite informal, but also we'll have kind of group, like those class shots to start with. And then once some of these restrictions are lifted, that's the hope, then we will look at scheduling photo days. But right now, those are not on the calendar.
Okay. It could be screenshot day, I guess. Just kidding.
Yeah.
There's some questions about, would it be okay for girls to occasionally join in on any in-person outside could they join in for outside activities if they live in the neighborhood? Is that a possibility? That's a question I hadn't even thought of being answered. So
yeah, for contact tracing, it would not be able to be informal drop-in. Unfortunately, we have very strict requirements about contact tracing and documentation of who is where and when during the school day. So that would have to be something to just contact me separately and let me know if that's something you're thinking of. It would be difficult, I'm not going to lie, just because it would require a really extra layer of documentation and recording that we would have to look at how we do that. So I don't want to say no, because I completely understand where the question's coming from. And when they're outside, obviously there is, as we've heard from all the research, a lot less risk. So I would just need to really think about that. So please contact me on my email if you want to chat, or a phone.
Could be difficult in a different type of emergency, I suppose, as well, where we need to account for everyone.
Yeah.
There's a question about if a student is feeling unwell, are they able to join in on online learning that day, so not to put their peers at risk?
So here's where I want to make the distinction. If someone is, let's just say, like, again, in a normal school year where we were running as typical, And if someone stayed home because they weren't feeling well, they would still have all the access to Schoology, all the access to the online resources, to emailing the teacher, to all of that. And then what we're separately talking about is a program for kids who have selected, families who have selected at-home learning. So if a teacher has a class, and we have quite a few of them, where there are no at-home learners, then they are not going to be set up to do all the things that we talked about previously in the webinar. So they are not necessarily going to have practiced running a synchronous class with a laptop, with a Google Meet, with their iPad, with the notes on the board. Like this is new for a lot of our teachers, and this is going to require practice. It's going to require having the right technology in the room. So if a student is sick or staying at home because they've got symptoms or they're in a quarantine period, they will 100% have access to all of the learning and contact with the teacher and ongoing support. But if that teacher is not already running a program for at-home learners, then some of the things that I talked about may not be part of that support. So if a student then goes on to being at home for longer than a 2-week period, so which would be the quarantine period, and the family wants to move that student to at-home learning, then we would put them on the at-home learning list, and then that teacher would have to get up to speed with all of those pieces. So it's really going to depend, but 100%, if your daughter's at home, part of the in-school program, but at home because she's not well, but well enough to learn, then we will definitely support her learning. And she will have the same kinds of access to Schoology and any resources or videos, contact with the teacher, etc. But she wouldn't become officially part of the at-home learning program unless there was an extended period of absence. So I hope that makes sense. And if you want to discuss further, then please let me know. Or Mr. Belly.
I could see how, too, Megan, if speaking as a teacher who has a number of classes, if I've just come in, I've come off a parking lot duty, and I'm teaching first period, it may be difficult for me to even know right away that I need to include that student in. So, like, it might be easier, you know, as the day were to progress, but it might be just logistically very difficult.
Yeah,
No,
yeah. So I think, again, it's probably going to be a very case-by-case scenario. Whereby we kind of figure out, and that's part of Mr. Belly's role too, is to figure out, okay, so how is this student being supported, and are they part of this, or are they being supported in a separate way? But yeah, we'll make sure that the learning continues. Again, I think the priority there for me would be on the student's health and wellness. And in some cases, you're right, the student is going to be at home just because they had some symptoms, but they're still like fine to be working. And in that case, yes, like we would want the learning to continue as well.
And I think one thing I'll say, the teachers are getting tired of seeing me this week because I've been training them on so many things. But I imagine that they'll get better and more nimble as the weeks progress. And so that kind of thing might be more possible in the future, but right away might be more difficult. There's a question about sports teams. Are we doing that this year?
So we, again, because of cohorting and because of restrictions with health and safety, the sports teams are not happening in nearly the same way this year. Many
cut out there, Meg. So she's probably going to say that certain things can happen within a cohort, but that sports teams that cross
country running, rowing for, and this would be if you had specific questions about which sports, you could contact, and I can give you those contacts. Miss Erin Derbyshire for middle school athletics, Mr. Ivan Sambles for senior school athletics. So in the city, there are no tournaments, there are no games, there are no, like, none of those things are being organized at that level. So anything that we do, it would be more of a like a club where students might have the opportunity to, within their grade cohort, go for a run if they wanted to be part of cross country. Those are things that we're still figuring out because the guidelines are changing almost, I was going to say daily, that might be an exaggeration, but definitely weekly. And so around what can and cannot be permitted to happen on campus. So again, we won't be transporting students to locations for sports. So if you were part of a sport, for example, I used to coach swimming. Well, I do coach swimming at the school. But this year we will not be doing swimming because there are so many restrictions around getting to the pool, being at the pool, and all of those pieces. So it really depends on the sport. And this is also something that will probably change quite rapidly throughout the school year in terms of what we can and can't do. So I would say just keep an eye out on Schoology for any opportunities for kind of what things might be running in a very different fashion. As I said, it's not going to be like a team, cross grade team that's going away to games and tournaments like we had in the past, but we are going to try to have certain pockets of physical activity and practice happening within grades that we can.
So there's another question which I think I can answer about are the labs equipped to support online learning? And I'll answer that in two different ways. So if we're talking physical labs, all of our rooms have great Wi-Fi coverage and internet access, but I imagine it means more about the actual doing of a science lab. And I imagine that there are two ways we'll handle this. One is we have a subscription to an amazing piece of software called Gadgets, which allows for online simulations of labs. You might have seen that with your daughter doing some of those labs during our lockdown period in the spring, and we've actually expanded our license. I just yesterday sent off a quote to get more teachers able to use that than we had last year, so that's exciting. And then of course there's also the possibility of pairing your daughter up with someone who's actually in the class so they can participate in a group if a lab is being conducted. I don't know the logistics of touching of things. Miss E, maybe you can talk about that as far as a lab is concerned. Certain things, you know, shared equipment, that kind of thing probably might make certain types of labs more difficult, and that's where our online system might be used perhaps as the major way that we do labs, but I don't know if you have more information about that.
Yeah, so the science department's been working really hard on this, and as Mr. Pro said, that even for the at-school learners, labs are going to look different because we're not permitted to share equipment, and also the teacher is not permitted to get close enough to the student. So in a situation where there might be a safety, the teacher needs to be right there beside the student if they're using a new piece of apparatus. So there are actually lots of restrictions with this, even for the in-school learners. So the applications that Mr. Pro is talking about, where we will do simulated labs, where the teacher will be demonstrating a lab, that is actually going to look very similar for the at-home learners as well as the in-school learners in many cases. And then we have also talked about the science teachers will be sharing with the classes at the start of the year if there are simple experiments that can be done at home. They will be kind of talking about materials and things that if they have access to, that these are maybe ways or methods that they can practice some of this at home. And again, that would be recommendations, not just for the at-home learners, but for the learners at school. So yes, we are thinking about it.
Cool. And Miss Howell was a master of creating very cool videos during our lockdown of different experiments and things like that. So a question.
Miss Soon wanted me to talk about how we're going to support students in different time zones. So if I could talk about that for a second. So obviously the at-home learners that are in different time zones, especially those very far away in China, especially with a 12 or 13-hour time difference, that's going to be fairly difficult. But thankfully there aren't that many in that situation. So I'll be able to work very closely with those learners and their families to make sure that everything goes smoothly. And also I'll be able to communicate with the teachers and really make sure that they know that the student is in a different time zone, and how big the difference is. And then we'll also be able to try to find maybe a time for the teacher to meet with the student in case they have any questions or things like that. So because we do have a smaller school and not that many at-home learners, it is very feasible for me to work with each at-home learner in a different time zone to make sure that they are well supported. So for those of you in that situation, don't worry, you'll be well taken care of.
Perfect, thank you. So there was a question about if a student has an appointment and they're an online student and it's during a synchronous class, how is this communicated to the teacher? And Missy, why don't you go ahead and answer that?
So it would be very similar to what we would do if the student was absent when we were at school. So if it's a synchronous class, and the teacher will log on, and if they see that that online learner isn't there, then it will be indicated as an absent online. So that, again, we know that the documentation for attendance in classes is accurate. And then if it was an in-school learner, obviously, as soon as we are aware that a student is absent, we would be contacting home to find out why they haven't come in, like if everything's okay, and just notify the family that there's an absence. But for the at-home learners, there would be no immediate call home. But however, as soon as we see that that student has been absent during the day, then we would be following up from the teacher or Mr. Belly, depending on if it was just a one class absence or if it was a full day absence, to determine the reason for the absence and if the student is okay and if there's anything we can do to help support. But if the student if you knew ahead of time, and a lot of our students do this anyway, the student can reach out and contact the teacher ahead of time to say, I'm going to be absent from class today. Can you please let me know what we're working on and what are the things I should be doing? And are you recording the lesson so that I can watch it later? So again, like a lot of our students are very proactive in that way anyway, and would reach out to the teachers ahead of time if they were going to be absent. So I would say on either way, like it might be a last minute thing where they're going to be absent because of something. And so in that case, they might not have time to notify the teacher ahead of time. And then it would just go into the record as absent online. And then if we see, this is one of the things that we found in the spring, and this is why Mr. Belly is going to be monitoring that attendance, is that it was because there was less of a strict attendance taking in the spring as we were all adjusting to the online learning. It was easier for students to kind of not show up to certain things and then not really have a sense of why or what was going on. And so that is something that we are going to be a lot more strict about, where, you know, we will be following up if a student is absent for more than just one class because of an appointment. So,
Good. There's a question about materials. So, and specifically, if students are in an art class and they need specific materials to do that project, although I'm sure this could work for an at-home experiment too, how much advance notice can be expected for that kind of thing?
So I just had a conversation with Miss Chen this week about the art materials. Well, we've been talking about it all summer actually, but we kind of had a more in-depth conversation last week. So because the students are not allowed to share materials, so in the art class, she might normally say, okay, you know, grab a pencil from a basket of pencils, and that won't be happening. So we've discussed two options, and she's kind of trying to figure out what she thinks will be better for the students and the families. So one of the options is that, so she's buying art kits for every student, but initially those art kits were going to be kind of a lesser art kit where the school was going to absorb all the cost. And now Miss Chun is feeling that she would actually really like to buy a little bit more comprehensive art set and art materials, and it would be grade dependent, like for the curriculum for that grade. And she said, so then it would be a matter of saying to parents, don't buy any art materials, but this is what you will be billed by the school. And then, of course, parents would have the option to opt out if they felt that that was too much, but it could then impact obviously what your daughter is able to do in the class. So if you were an at-home learner and we were purchasing that art kit for you, then we would have it at reception. You would just come in to pick it up. But if you would prefer to just say, no, we're an at-home learner, we don't want to come in and pick up kit, we're going to buy all of our own stuff, then Miss Chun would just give you the list of all the things that are going to be in that art kit. So I think she is still kind of figuring out. So I think the first couple of weeks, the art lessons will be based on very much kind of materials that are going to be lying around the house or anyway. Probably more reflective kind of activities. And then she'll let the students know kind of around the materials and the art kits what they should either be getting themselves, or do they want to have one of these kits that she's going to be preparing and purchasing.
Okay. And I think we can probably broadly expect that if anything is required for any other class as well at home for like an experiment or whatever, that will be communicated with plenty of time ahead.
Yes. Yeah.
I think I've reached the end of questions. So if you have a question out there that you'd love answered, please go ahead and type it in the chat and we will address it. One thing I will say is, yeah, we've been doing lots of different work with teachers this week with regards to training them how they can synchronously teach classes in person and online at the same time. And many of our teachers got pretty good at doing this in the spring, at least the online teaching part, but this is definitely, it's another step forward for them. And so we'll want feedback from you guys for sure. But there'll also be a bit of a learning period for everyone. So as we all learn how to do this best, making sure to stay calm and just letting myself and Mr. Bellet know so that we can follow up teachers and make sure that everything works really well. When will students receive their schedules?
So the students will receive an email on Monday that will tell them their homeroom teacher and their homeroom kind of room number. And that email will also have information in it that is for students physically returning to school, because obviously the room number is not really something that the at-home learners are going to need to know. And then on Tuesday, the full schedule will be available on my backpack. And students who are coming into school will receive a paper copy of their schedule. And then, but they can also all access their schedule through my backpack. So if your daughter is someone who would like to have a paper copy of her schedule, then you will be able to print that from the My Backpack site where her schedule will show up. But we can also help support with emailing documents if you're having trouble accessing those. So, but everything will be Monday and then Tuesday. So Monday for the homeroom teacher and then Tuesday for the full schedule. Also, homeroom teachers are going to be starting to reach out and emailing students. So in terms of when a homeroom teacher gets around to doing that, your daughter actually might hear about her homeroom even before Monday, because I know some teachers are kind of, managing their weekend. And if they're really busy on Monday, then they may end up sending out the email a little bit early. But regardless, you should know the homeroom by Monday, and then you would know the full schedule by Tuesday.
Okay, we've got 2 more questions. If a student is outside of the country right now, how can they get their access to their textbooks? I can think of some practical ways we can do this, but is there something you want to say about that, either Missy or Mr. Bellet, or should I kind of?
So some of the textbooks are available online. So that would be one thing to look into first. If there's an online version, more and more textbooks are available that way. And then if they are physical paper textbooks, then yes, we would work with you individually to determine the best way to get them to you. If we need to have them sent to the school and then we send them to you, we would do that. So I think have a look at the books, have a look at what you think you can get electronically, and then we go from there. So again, contacting Mr. Belly about that would be a great idea, or the teacher directly if you had a specific question about, is this textbook available online? The teacher would know that as well.
Question about music class. How's that going to work this year for at-home learners?
So it'll be the same as every other subject. They'll connect to the class through the Google Meet. I guess the good thing for at-home learners is if they play a wind instrument, they can still play it, whereas our in-school learners cannot. A lot of the music is going to be different because we don't have the ability to do a full band, because there are many instruments that we cannot have students playing at school. So the teacher will be conducting classes, and those classes will largely be running synchronously for those at-home learners, because the teacher will then be able to kind of engage through the activities that they're doing, whether it's thinking about rhythm and percussion and anything that the student needs to practice. So if there's a student who is a wind instrument player who is at school, then the teacher may say, if you want to continue practicing at home, like here are things you can do at home, whereas your at-home learner will be able to do it. So I think, yeah, just assume that the music class is happening in the same way as any other class would happen. But obviously, in general, music is going to look quite different because of the restrictions around what we can and can't use in terms of instruments.
I think we have time for one more question here, and this is maybe a good one to end on. It's about what the first day of school would look like. Specifically, students are asking, will they be asked to go to every single class like in past years? And what will that look like for online learners?
So no, we're not going to every single class because we want to kind of limit that flow and movement in the hallway. And on those days when we would do that, the hallways were always really busy because kids were moving so much during the day. So Wednesday we'll have an altered schedule, and that schedule will be shared with the at-home learners first thing in the morning when they go to homeroom. It'll be shared with the at-school learners when they come to homeroom. So it will be a day one, well, actually a day three, because it's week one on a Wednesday, but we're having the girls go to homeroom first. I will say for the at-home learners, it might be a little bit dull because a lot of it will have to be focused on the protocols for health routines. So we need our at-home learners to be very aware, or sorry, our in-school learners to be very aware of those. So the homeroom teacher will be covering a lot of that and on that first morning, so that the at-home learners can join. But I will say that a lot of it might not be relevant for them because it will be talking about the procedures in the school to get everyone up to speed. But then the day will proceed as a regular day three, but with some altered timing to make account for the fact that they're going to a longer homeroom period in the morning. And we'll have a virtual welcome back assembly. And yeah, so that schedule, I mean, we're starting school at the exact same time of day. And then in the homeroom, they'll learn about kind of how we're adjusting the timing for the day. So, but it's not going to be going to every single class.
Okay. Thank you, Megan. I think we'll have to wrap it up here because it's 11
Yes,
o'clock.
I have another session as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. There are a number of questions still there. Will they be answered in our FAQ or?
Could you grab a screenshot of them, Mr.
Yep.
Perot?
No problem.
Okay. So we'll make sure that your questions go into the FAQ, which is available to parents on the website. And if you have other questions that you want to email Mr. Belly or I directly, please do so as well. And we really look forward to having your girls part of our program. And I want to thank Mr. Belly and Mr. Perot for the work they're putting into making sure that the learning is going to continue and the girls are going to be well supported. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great day.